Before you jump into Jagged Alliance 3, there are a couple of things worth knowing that can help you get started. This video, however, is neither a full guide nor an explanation of all the game mechanics. Instead, I would like to focus on a few things that might not be so obvious. When you start the game, you can put together kind of a custom difficulty, and one of the options there is called Dead is Dead, and it kinda sounds like it's an Ironman mode, but that's not really the case, and with that it might be less interesting for some players and maybe worth a look for others. In this mode, the game will automatically save when you finish a battle or enter a zone, and for the most part there's also just one save slot, but only for the most part. While running around you can actually quick save, and if you run on a mine you can freely load that save. And as long as the combat is not resolved, you can also restart it again and again. Just when the combat is finished, or you enter a new zone for example, then the previous save will be overwritten and the quick save will be removed. When choosing between the standard difficulty, hard or very hard, it also tells you that the difficulty determines how much money you get and that you can change this at any time. But I wondered whether the starting funds also depend on this, and indeed that's the case. And of course the money will not magically reappear if you decide to switch later on. While you start with $40,000 on standard, you only get $30,000 and $24,000 on the higher difficulties. The additional funding which you will receive after about the first hour of game time, however, is $30,000 on all difficulties. You started the game and are now prompted to recruit your mercenaries. But before you do so, you should first switch over to creating your own character. In difference to the Mercs for hire, this one won't have any ongoing costs, but there is a one-time fee of $6,999 you need to pay upfront. So before you run out of cash hiring Mercs, it might be better to first get this out of the way. Whether you decide to do the multiple choice test or to skip it, at the end you will be able to freely adjust the character's values yourself. The lowest possible value is either 0 or 30, and the highest is always 85. Of course, it's up to you to decide what kind of character you want. However, I would like to point out a couple of things which might not be that apparent. First one being that agility is going to be more important in Jagged Alliance 3 than it was in Jagged Alliance 2 and 1. While in Jagged Alliance 2, a slow character like Bull had less action points he could use for moving, the costs for shooting were actually adjusted accordingly, so that a slow mercenary could shoot as often as a fast one, even if this could sometimes become silly due to rounding. In Jagged Alliance 3 on the other hand, each character needs the same amount of AP to shoot and to use abilities. If you create a character with 30 agility, he or she will only have 6 action points and cannot even use the standard run and gun ability with a machine pistol. You also won't be able to use the character as sniper, because that would require 7 AP to pull the trigger. With higher values on the other hand, the character even gets an additional free movement range. So be aware of the consequences of a character with low agility. Wisdom isn't just responsible for finding hidden items, it also determines how fast the other values can be increased. And while these other values can all be trained, that's not the case with Wisdom. So if you build a very unwise character, he will likely also never become a smart cookie in the future. Wisdom is also increasing the experience gained for getting level ups. There is a relatively fixed amount of experience for quests, which is distributed equally among all characters in the sector, even on other squads. The more characters, the less experience for each individual one. The experience the character receives is then modified by Wisdom. A very smart character with 95 Wisdom will get about 10% more experience than an average one with 75. And not so bright characters like Kalina with only 48 Wisdom will get about 10% less. If you want to boost a character's level, you can first send all other characters away from the sector. Once they actually left and are not still traveling, then all of the experience will end up on the character left behind. If there is a bonus on the total experience due to the number of characters, then it's likely around 1 or 2% per character, which didn't really become clear during my tests. As you could see here, the experience gained can also be checked later using the logbook. This can be opened by clicking on the snipe icon. It also shows quest rewards and object descriptions. Very handy if you missed something. By the way, unlike in Jagged Alliance 2, in Jagged Alliance 3 values of 0 can still be increased. The first few points are learned very quickly, and so there's a little added value in setting any low stats during character creation instead of 0. You get most out of it if you just go for all or nothing.
Hey, just letting you know, I'm super all done here.
For the skills Mechanics, Explosives and Medicine, there are also very cheap characters available who can take over the job for operations outside of combat, even though there aren't plenty of cheap specialized mercs to choose from. So maybe check if it's better to hire Steroid or Livewire as your mechanic, for example, instead of learning it on the main character. Unlike in its predecessors, in Jagged Alliance 3, the Explosive skill is actually also determining whether the grenade explodes in your face when thrown, so be aware. By the way, when collecting scrap with a mechanic ability, the ability only determines whether you discover the source or not. But the amount of material you get from it is left to chance, so you don't need to wait until someone with better skill is available before collecting the scrap. To assign a character to an operation as a doctor or repairman, he or she will need a skill of at least 30 in that category. The exception being the training of militia. By the way, in the case of operations that cost money up front, you are not being refunded if you cancel the operation, which is quite unfortunate as you possibly won't know beforehand what you can actually craft at the time with the material you got. It is also worth knowing that you can assign more than one person to operations for teaching wounds, repairing and training militia, but they all got quite some different calculations. When repairing, the operation will always take at least 6 hours. With 2 people repairing, you're only cutting the time beyond these 6 hours in half. 2 people doing twice the work is also true for training militia, without the 6-hour limitation. However, characters with the teaching trait have a clear advantage. Even though Kalina's leadership of 52 vastly trumps MD's meager 4 points, MD is actually the better trainer, as his teacher trait counts for about 50 points in that skill. Unfortunately, that's not showing up in the operation interface though. When treating wounds, the indication of the time needed can be quite misleading. Sometimes it shows when the first patient is done, sometimes when the whole operation is finished. Additional patients do not have any influence on the duration as long as they don't have more wounds than the previous ones. Additional doctors do speed up the operation, but only with about 50% efficiency. In addition, doctors can also treat their own wounds. So always remember to also use your patients as doctors themselves if they are not supposed to stand around. If you really need to know how long the whole operation would take, you can first assign all the doctors and the patient with the highest number of wounds. This is then going to be the total duration, even if you should add additional patients and the value changes again. I hope that this overview gave you a better idea of the character stats and it helps creating a mercenary you will be happy with in the long run. However, if you prefer to roleplay instead and have fun with an immobile medic who only ever arrives at the wounded after they have bled out, then of course I don't want to discourage you from doing so. Let us now take a look at the mercenaries you can hire. Here I got 2 tips. Well, actually you know the first one already. I stressed the importance of agility in the character creation, and of course the same applies here. Together with the character level, this determines the action points of your mercs. So be aware that someone like Steroid will have just 8 action points, while a similarly priced Blood will have a whopping 13 action points. Also keep in mind that characters have traits and unique talents, and these might actually be more valuable than some stat differences. Secondly, I recommend taking a closer look at the costs, because they are somewhat misleading unfortunately. At first glance, a Barry seems to be the cheapest mercenary. However, that's not actually correct. Igor's costs are higher, but a good part of that is spent on the insurance. While you got to pay this one when hiring the Merc, these are just one-off costs, which you even get refunded in case you send the character home again at some point. If you extend the contract, these costs will not occur again, which means that in the long run, Igor is actually cheaper than Barry. For a rat, the insurance even accounts for a third of the displayed price. So look carefully there and don't be put off by slightly higher prices if these are due to the insurance. Of course you also get a discount hiring mercs for a longer period, but you probably already guessed that. Soon you will have so many mercs that you will organize them into squads, and at this point it is useful to know that there is a sector inventory. While you can't pass items directly from a member of one squad to a member of another, you can put items into the sector stash and then take them out with the other squad. However, this stash can only be accessed from the world map, and items cannot be repaired from this stash. So having a single guy back home repairing items would become somewhat difficult due to his or her very limited inventory. Lastly, some info regarding graphics, settings and performance. The minimum system requirements for the game state that you need a GTX 950, and actually that one should run the game quite well. Personally, I have a somewhat stronger, but also already 7-year-old GTX 1070, and with it the game can be played at 1080p and mostly high settings with quite stable 60 FPS, which is the maximum for me with activated VSync. To find the best setting for you, find a location where the screen is filled with forest and keep the camera there. At high settings I'm only at 30 FPS there, but once I set the reflections to medium it's up to 60. But only as long as I don't move the camera, which is when the FPS drop back down to 30 to 40. However, this can be changed with the terrain detail setting. If I set that to medium as well, I get permanent 60 FPS now, even with a moving camera. At least as long as there are no light cones, which can also reduce the FPS dramatically. Reduce shadows to medium and the FPS is fine again. So if you're also still rocking a very old card, you know what you can do to easily increase the performance without much of a loss in terms of visuals. And presumably these settings will also be the most important ones for more modern cards on higher screen resolutions. In any case, the game runs extremely well on old hardware, so kudos to Haemimont for the great optimization. And that's all of my tips, and I hope that this will make it easier for you to get started and that it saves you a lot of trial and error. And if it does, then I'd appreciate a thumbs up. I also plan to do an unboxing video of the Tactical Edition in the very near future. Consider subscribing if you're interested. And with that, farewell and best of luck in Grand Chien.
Ah, fuck!